as folks come in. And start here. Yep. Go. And there's that. Perfect. Okay. One more thing. Thank you for bearing with me as I push 3 billion buttons to make sure all of those good things happen. Good evening. Thank you all so much for joining our live virtual author showcase tonight. We're here tonight to celebrate Janet Fox, Julie Gandula, Effie and Celia Risho, Bruce Smith, and Lauren Ojeda Melchor. I'm your host, Jessica, here at Country Bookshelf on the ancestral unceded land of the Apsalaki Crow, Kootenai, Bitterroot Salish, Cheyenne, Shoshone Bannock, Ochedi Shikoan, Kalispel Ponderay, Piikani Blackfeet, Northern Cheyenne, Chippewa Cree, Assiniboine, Aani Gravant, and the Dakota peoples, among others. We encourage those of you joining us from outside Bozeman and Montana to learn more about the land that you occupy and the stories of its peoples. Be sure to sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date on all of the happenings at Country Bookshelf, and follow us on Eventbrite to register for more great upcoming events, including our adult version or adult speed round next Wednesday. Same bat time, same bat channel. Before we get to all of our authors today, I just want to let you know a few things about this virtual space. You can purchase copies of all of the authors' books on our website at countrybookshelf.com. I'll be dropping a link into the chat here once I stop talking. We are recording tonight's event, so if you have to jump out for a little bit, you can find it on our YouTube channel after the fact. That's also a great place to check in if you're having technical difficulties and exiting and re-entering doesn't fix it. You can find us on our YouTube stream. And if you're having sound issues, usually headphones will fix it. So I recommend those. And of course, this is a shared creative space, so we want it to remain safe for everyone that's joined us tonight. So offensive and inappropriate comments or questions will see the user dismissed from this space. And importantly, to leave those questions, you can leave them in the chat or in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And so the way our event will go tonight, we will hear from an author about their book, and then we'll have a few minutes for questions for that author, and then we'll move on to the next one. And then we should end up with a few minutes at the end for more questions as well. So without further ado, we're going to kick it off tonight with Janet Fox, an author, mom, outdoor enthusiast, and former teacher. She's been to the bottom of the ocean in a submersible and had a brief fling with rock stardom. Her novels are written for children and young adults, but have won her fans of all ages. Her Gothic middle grade novel, The Charmed Children of Rookskill Castle, has received a whole bunch of stars, and the lovely Crystal Kite Award, and its sequel, The Artifact Hunters, is also really fantastic. At the moment, she is actually, I don't see stripes in your hair at the moment, so scratch that. No stripes, but she does live here in Bozeman, and you can learn more about Janet's books. She's here tonight to share Carry Me Home. Janet, take it away.
Thanks, Jess. Yeah, pandemic hair, right? We're all in that boat. Hi, I'm Janet Fox. I'm the author of 9 books for young readers, and most of them are for middle grade and older. I have a picture book out about Yellowstone, actually, so if you're in the Yellowstone area, and also another picture book coming out in a year and a half. But tonight, I want to talk to you about this book, Carry Me Home. I don't know if you can see it very well, but it has the most beautiful cover. I was very happy with the cover. And I'm also very happy with the book. Carry Me Home is a story that grew out of I listened to a radio broadcast about 4 or 5 years ago. That's how long it takes sometimes for a story to percolate in my head. And it was a story about a family living in their car, a father, a mother, and 3 children. And both parents were working 2 jobs. And I was trying to imagine this situation. First of all, how difficult it must have been for the entire family, but also if one of the children was, say, a tween, like 12, 13 years old, and how it would feel to have to do your homework in a car, how it have to feel to have to get dressed in a car, to be cold in a car, to maybe not have enough food, to maybe not have the right clothes, because you know how middle schoolers can be. And I kept thinking about it, but I wasn't ready to write that story. And it just kept percolating in the back of my head as I wrote some other books that came out. But this one really, really touched my heart because I couldn't imagine what it must have been like for that family and particularly for those kids. And then about a year and a half ago, I was listening to another broadcast on the radio, and the story of Sadako and the 1,000 paper cranes was mentioned. And if you don't know it, in Japanese culture, there is a tradition of making origami cranes, and that's what these are on the cover of the book. Making 1,000 origami cranes takes you on your way to fulfilling a wish, whatever that wish might be. In Sadako's case, she suffered through the bombing of Hiroshima, and so she was afflicted by fallout from the bomb and was very sick. And her wish in terms of making 1,000 paper cranes, and by the way, this is sort of based on a true story. Her wish was that she would get well, that she would survive. And so she began making 1,000 paper cranes. Sadly, she did not survive. She did not see to the end of making those paper cranes, although people rallied around her in the story and made cranes on her behalf. It's a very moving story, and I imagine that my protagonist, Lulu, in this story might come across that story when she is living in a car with her sister and father and wakes up, and this is no surprise because it happens on page 1, wakes up one morning and dad is missing. Mom is already gone and dad is missing. And so it is Lulu and her sister Serena alone, living in a car in Montana, by the way. I said it in a fictional town, but I will tell you a secret. I imagine that fictional town was Livingston, or Livingston-like, a small Montana town with very generous people. And Lulu, finding herself in charge of the family, is really coping with the consequences of being alone and being responsible and having no home. That's the story. It sounds like a really, really sad story. It is a sad story in a sense that I just hate to think about the fact that there are so many homeless in this country right now and so many hungry. And that breaks my heart. But I think of this as a very positive and powerful book because it's really a story about community. It's really a story about how, first of all, Lulu has to discover that there are so many people around her who are willing to help. She has to be then willing to open her heart to that help and find it. And when she does, it changes her life. I won't tell you anymore because I don't want to spoil the story for you. I hope you'll read it. But I'm very proud of it. I think it ends on a very positive note. And Lulu is a really powerful character who lives in my heart in a big way. So that is the story of Carry Me Home. It's contemporary, set in today's times, difficult times, and it's set in the fall winter. So it's Montana, snow. And there you go. So any questions, shoot them into the chat, and they can come later in the chat too. I'll keep an eye on them.
So thank you, Janet.
Thank you.
The quiet applause instead of the loud ones. I'm curious how, if the pandemic changed the research that you were having to do, or changed the story at all, since housing became an even more contested issue once everyone had to be in their homes.
So actually, this story, once it percolated, I wrote this story faster than I've ever written anything in my life. I wrote it in about 6 weeks. It just dropped from the heavens, as it were. And I wrote it in the fall of 2019. So that's before the pandemic. And actually, it was purchased by Simon & Schuster pretty much right away. My agent sent it out pretty much right away. It was purchased right away. So it all happened before the pandemic really hit. I signed the contract in that January as we were just sort of, what's going on here? Having a book come out during a pandemic is a whole nother story, which I'm sure everybody in this space can attest to. I had 2 books come out because another book came out in August last year, and this came out in August this year. So but it is reflective, I think, of our times. I do think that this is a book that speaks to a lot of what's happening in the country today. So in answer to your question. Yeah.
Absolutely. Would you also talk a little bit about the ways that your research, because the previous 2 novels, Artifact Hunters, which is a companion to The Charmed Children of Rookskill Castle, are both sort of historical fiction meets fantasy. And so I'm curious how your research maybe process was the same and how it was different, writing historical versus contemporary.
That's a good question. So historical fiction, of course, I'm very much into doing the research around not only the history of the time, but also the place. So there's a lot of world building that I do. It takes me much, much longer to write that kind of book. It's something that I have to really think about and structure around and do a lot of free writing on. This book came so much from my heart. I just felt like I could put myself in Lulu's position, not entirely because I've never been homeless, but I just felt that I knew what it would be like to be a girl of 12 who was living on the margins and unaccepted by her peers. And by the way, although this is set largely in Montana, Lulu and Serena have very recently arrived from Texas. So they're not used to Montana weather. They have no real friends in Montana. Lulu has no real friends, has no real acquaintances, has no family other than her missing dad. And so it's very much about Lulu. And that just comes from my 12-year-old heart. That comes from the person that I was at 12 with insecurities and uncertainties and being scared in situations. And that's how I approached this story, that, dealing with all the things that she was dealing with really came from me, and how I might feel in this terrible situation. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, we may come back to this fantasy versus world building versus reality world building a little later, when we hear from a couple of our fantasy authors that are joining us today. But I might move on to one of them. So thank you so much, Janet. Absolute delight. We'll see you again in a little bit. And now I will welcome Julie Gandala to the screen. Julie is a writer, philosopher, and natural wellness educator, and an outdoor enthusiast. She lives in Montana with her children, Aiden and Fallon, their 2 dogs, Fox and Knight, and their 4 frogs, Max, Ruby, Shakespeare, and Hathaway. Julie is sharing Magic, the Beginning with us. So Julie, take it away.
Thank you for having me. Yep, today I'm here to talk about my book, The Magic Beginnings. It's the first book of a 10-book series. It's based here in Montana, like a lot of my fellow authors. I think that speaks to the richness of the state in this area. But I guess first I should introduce myself. Again, my name is Julie Gondula. I was born and raised here in Bozeman, Montana. I went to the university and just loved it so much I stuck around. And then of course I had my kids here. And another unique part about this book that has a lot of my heart in it is that my children helped me author this book. So everything from the content of the story to the pictures to you name it, they had a part in. My daughter Fallon is 9 and my son Aiden is 17. So they had drastically different contributions to the book, as you can imagine. But like, for instance, if I can show you guys, the title page is my son's work. And so it's his own sketching work. And this book in particular had him in mind. And then if you go further in, you'll see pictures of my daughter and again, other parts of the book that are their contributions. So it was really a family endeavor. I originally wrote this book for my kids. So I started it 5-6 years ago. And I really liked what Janet had mentioned about something needed to percolate, because it did take a while for me to go back to it. It was something that I loved and kind of came out and was inspired, and I wrote it for my kids, but I left it for a little while. But what originally sparked that story at first was wanting to write it for my son and my daughter, of course, but particularly my son, because he really resisted reading. He wasn't super inspired to read. So I was like, how can I get him going with it? And then the other part was that the book itself is arranged around a worry rock. And he had a worry rock that he got from his aunt in the shape of a bear. And so all of that's in the book actually happened to my son, but he lost it. And so it's just this heart-wrenching experience, because I know it sounds kind of silly. It's all about a rock, but it was such a special rock. It was so unique, and it was not something that was built. It was something that was naturally created. My sister had happened to look down while she was in Ireland, and there, sure enough, was a worry rock in the shape of a bear. And it just dawned on her. It just spoke to her that it was for my son, Aiden. And so long story short, that was the inspiration of it. I leave it for several years, and then, yep, COVID hits. And so lots of my life and my family's life changed, and I began to head down a different road, opened a natural wellness center that really focuses on connection with nature. But so did that story. So it really made me go back into that story, and we decided to formalize it, get it together, finish the construction of it, and we published it together. Now, as far as the book itself and the storyline itself, it is all about philosophy, mythology, and science. It's a fact fiction book. The age range is similar to the Magic Tree House, where you can read it to younger readers and then they can grow into reading it themselves. And then the plot line itself is very dynamic. So it really appeals to those middle readers as well and older readers. And so what happens when you first dive into the book is that you do meet this protagonist who has a worry rock in the shape of a bear. And then how it transitions is that each book, so this is the first of the series, each book is pairing a virtue with an animal or a force of nature that really exemplifies that virtue. And so that's where the whole idea of connecting with nature comes in, as nature being a great or the great teacher. This particular book is about the virtue of patience and how a little northern pygmy owl is a really, really wonderful role model for that virtue of patience. And so our protagonist struggles this particular day and ends up rubbing this worry rock, and he's never had an interaction with it before. And sure enough, it awakens the magic within this rock, and he's taken on this wild adventure into the wilderness and becomes a northern pygmy owl. And he is a northern pygmy owl until he can sort out how he can be more patient, how he can understand this virtue of patience more. The other part of that is that you deal with all this mythology and Gaelic tradition of fairies, philosophy of what it means to be patient, and then the science behind the animal, like the northern pygmy owl in our forest. The readers get to really understand that at the end of the book, even without knowing it, they learn that, an owl's eyes aren't orbs, they're actually tubes. And that when a pygmy owl in particular gets wet, it has to preen off its little feathers. Otherwise, it's not going to be that silent predator anymore. So different facts are woven in, and it's just a really lovely blend of philosophy, mythology, and science, and I dare say a good degree of humor. So it's been really, really wonderful to write, and I'm excited for the second book. That one's going to showcase the virtue of creativity and how octopi can really exemplify that for us. And so my protagonist will go along that journey. So that kind of sums it up.
Fantastic. When do we get book 2?
It should come out in 2 months.
Okay, so
right
December.
After it's going to be after Christmas. We wanted to try to do it before Christmas, and let me tell you, it's not going to happen.
Supply chain problems are real, everyone.
That's a real thing.
We are not making them up. Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I'm curious first, did something replace the worry rock for Aiden once he lost it?
No, and that's an awesome question, because he was so, it was a devastating couple days, and he was, pretty young when he lost it, and I was hoping that the book itself, the story, because I would read it to a chapter to him, every day, and my daughter and my son would come back with feedback on what to happen. I was hoping that would kind of replace it. It never did. And then no actual object did either. It was just, yeah.
You can just start rubbing the book, right?
Yeah.
I'm curious. You mentioned I don't want it to make this the pandemic show, but
okay.
Because I feel like the book showcases a lot of really important coping mechanisms as you learn things like patience or creativity, and you return to this during this sort of generative period that many folks got to experience because of the shutdown. How was writing part of your coping for you and for your family?
That's a really good question. And I think you're spot on. It was kind of a coping mechanism for us, because it was in the middle, my family in particular, we lost lives during COVID. We lost business, a lot. And so it ended up being something that was really revitalizing for my family, because it was okay, we have all these uncontrollable factors. What can we do that is not only something that we can control, but make something very creative and beautiful out of it? So something that's seemingly dark and hard, can it create something very beautiful? And in our case, it really did, because we would come together and I'd say, well, okay, how do you feel about this chapter? Or how do you feel about this illustration? And, both of my kids would be like, nah, or yeah, that's great, but to generate something and creative and positive during a time that was very, very difficult was, it was a gift. Yeah.
How did the process of working on it with your kids sort of influence maybe the order that the virtues will appear?
Oh, your sneaky questions. Yes, no, that's a great question. Absolutely. Because that was a real deal on my son with patience. And then having seen him, because I did write it 5-6 years ago, and having seen him transition into young adulthood now, it has really made me step back on, how he went through those virtues. And we do all the time, it's not oh, I've learned patience and you check it off the list. It's that growing muscle,
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, just watching both my kids and the different personalities and traits they bring to stuff really made me step back. And the plot line really has a micro macro level to it, where you have the individual books and that micro, plot line where, okay, in this book, we're dealing with creativity and octopi, but there's also a big, larger plot line that plays. And that really, really dictated which virtues I'm going to go through, because at the end of the book is really that holistic coming together of, being in touch with yourself, making decisions that are in tune with yourself, and how nature can really help us get there.
Did you debate having following one main character through versus having different main characters approach different
Totally.
virtues?
Yeah. Oh, your questions are so great. Yes, absolutely. So, because my daughter and my son both played a part, but it was at different ages. My daughter, now that she's older, wants to play a bigger part. And she said that for years now, because it was always something that we talked about. So it's definitely going to weaven out where the protagonist isn't really singular. You'll definitely accompany Paul, who's my main protagonist, but you have the younger sister who plays into it a lot more. And it's for that reason, because we all do grow. It's all very dynamic. So it mirrored that for sure.
Well, and I hope that Paul will have to use some of the lessons he learned in the beginning as he goes through, and keep those owl traits while embracing those octopi traits.
Yep. Keep it going.
and any other menagerie that we get to encounter.
Absolutely.
So for any late comers, you can leave questions for our authors at any time. You can just drop them in the chat, or there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. I am watching both. And then we'll have time towards the end where you can ask everybody everything, most likely. And I am also going to redrop the link to purchase books here in the chat as I stare off screen. So if you haven't purchased your copy of Carry Me Home or The Beginnings of Magic, The Beginnings, you can do that at the link. I want to say thank you to Julie, and thank you as we all learn our sign language for Zoom. And we will move on to Bruce. Bruce Smith is a veteran wildlife manager and a scientist of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. He's the author of 4 books and the recipient of the 2012 Montana Book Award for Where Elk Roam. He is joining us this evening to share his children's debut, Legend Keepers. He lives in Bozeman, Montana, and you can learn more about him and his books and his work at brucesmithwildlife.com. Bruce.
Thank you,
Let's
Jessica.
keep some legends.
And thanks to the Country Bookshelf for sponsoring this event. And it's great to be here with my fellow Kidlit authors on this virtual stage. What a fun thing to be able to do. Often the first thing that an author is asked about a new book is, what's it about? And my new book, Legend Keepers, The Chosen One, is actually sort of a family project. I wrote the book, but my wife, Diana, did the cover art and all of the interior illustrations. So I just have to put in a plug for her beautiful artwork. Because the book is very new, just recently released, and most of you may not have heard about it, I thought I would start just by reading the first 3 paragraphs of the book. So, chapter 1, The Ledge. For 2 million years, vast sheets of ice covered the mountains. When they melted thousands of years ago, the ice had ground and gouged deep canyons with vertical walls. Into the wall of one remote canyon, the ice carved a narrow ledge. In this perilous place, a leggy 7-pound ball of fluff was born one June morning, covered in ivory wool with black nose and eyes and feet that seemed too big for her size. This was no ordinary kid, far from it. Topping the cliffs towering above her ledge, a treeless ridge angled westward. It halted where a massive block of granite jutted skyward. In its shadow roamed a band of mountain goats, her mom's band, the goats of Goat Mountain. This newborn kid had no knowledge of Goat Mountain and its band of goats, and she wouldn't until she'd grown stronger. That's when Buddy, the name she'd be given in a most peculiar way, would follow her mom up the cliffs to join the others. There, feasting in alpine meadows at the roof of the world, the mountain goats knew nothing of the soccer ball-sized kid on her ledge far below. Nor could they know something more. Unseen forces threatened them all, something foretold in an ancient legend that generations of goats had faithfully preserved, yet none had unraveled the prophecy hidden within. So I have to tell you that writing a novel wasn't on my bucket list. I didn't feel like authoring a children's book would somehow make my life complete. But on the other hand, I do enjoy a good challenge. So I decided to do this. My previous 5 works were adult nonfiction books about wildlife and wildlands, natural history, outdoor adventure, and all have environmental and conservation messages on topics that are important to me. But when I was touring with my 4th book, I became dismayed. Rarely were children at my book events. Their parents or grandparents didn't bring them, even though the event publicity made clear this is a talk for the whole family, with lots of slides of animals. That book was Life on the Rocks, a portrait of the mountain goat. And hey, kids, it won the National Outdoor Book Award. Why aren't you here? And it has lots of great photographs in it. So in a way, that was the inspiration for writing a children's book. I'm inspired by the aspirations and activism of young people, and I wanted to somehow nourish that. So in an aha moment, I decided I'd write a story specifically for kids. I'd talk directly to them, or rather the characters of my novel would. Legend Keeper stars Buddy, a kid mountain goat whose mother goes missing when Buddy is just days old. She's a determined and courageous kid, and she begins to search for her mom. But a small kid can only do so much alone. And in the nick of time, a wizardly raven named Rourke finds her and guides her to her mom's band of goats. But as you could tell from the opening page I read, Buddy discovers that she has a destiny. Only she can save her band of goats from a great peril foretold in that ancient legend. So begins her journey, during which she encounters other animals who either threaten her quest or they befriend and help her. One of them, by the way, Julia, is a northern pygmy owl. In a species that's quite remarkable, Buddy is an exceptional mountain goat. And you will come to believe that when you read this book. So you may be wondering, why choose a mountain goat for a protagonist? Well, other children's books have featured cats, dogs, bears. The one and only Ivan features the gorilla Ivan and Ruby the elephant. The Tale of Despero features a mouse. Charlotte's Web, of course, stars a spider. And there are plenty of other books with animal protagonists, but never a mountain goat. And by gosh, it's about time. I have a special fondness for mountain goats, as you can probably tell. Years ago, I spent 2 years living among them, deep in the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness area of Western Montana. I was conducting research for a graduate degree at that time. During my career as a wildlife biologist, I've worked with almost every large mammal in the Western US, studying them and managing their populations. But I continued writing about mountain goats and going into the mountains where they live to observe them over the years. I've climbed to where they live to photograph them now for, well, almost 50 years. So Legend Keepers is a story, kind of in summary, it's a story of hope, perseverance, and finding one's purpose. It's a story in which kids will see themselves as Buddy overcomes loss and hardship while learning the importance of friends and family. Beyond that, woven throughout Legend Keepers is an environmental subtext, something I intend to do in all of my children's novels. For her, how her home is changing as a result of a warming climate and the peril she comes to believe that may hold for her band of goats is that subtext. And on that level, the story is told through the words and eyes of the animals who are actually experiencing these changes in their home. So Legend Keepers is a story that both young and old can enjoy, kids my age, and you can learn a bit about as well as you read it. So that kind of sums it up. I'll stop talking and I'd love to hear any questions or comments.
I did notice that a few more folks have joined us, so please feel free to leave questions in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, or just drop them into the chat and we'll get to them after each author. And then hopefully we'll have a little bit of extra time at the very end for a few more questions. But I was listening closely there, Bruce, because I definitely was wondering why you chose the mountain goat. But you mentioned future children's books. So I'm curious if we've already met a character that will feature heavily in one of your next books.
Well, this is the first in the Legend Keeper series. I'm envisioning it will be a trilogy. Maybe it will go longer. I don't know yet. This one is Legend Keepers, The Chosen One. The sequel is called Legend Keepers, The Partnership. It's completed. My agent has it now. So it's out of my hands. We don't know when it will be published, maybe in another year.
Fantastic.
But in that book, Buddy will return for sure.
Okay.
I just couldn't let her go. And there'll be a few other characters from the book that I just couldn't let go. Because when I started, I didn't know this would be a series. But in the second book, I'm going to expand the narrative into the human world. Not just animal characters, another main character, kind of a co-main character with Buddy, will be Garson, a 12-year-old boy. He's very introverted. He and his mom have moved to a new town. He doesn't fit into school, and his father goes missing in the war. So he has a lot of things working against him. But something miraculous happens in his life. And as a result of it, his life and Buddy's will intersect in a really inspiring way.
Excellent. There's another character in Legend Keepers that I particularly enjoyed, and that's the Raven. And I'm curious why you paired Buddy with a raven to have their adventure.
Really good question, Jessica. You know, it wasn't even who is going to be this other sort of important character in the story. A raven was obvious. First of all, they're incredibly intelligent. I just think ravens are fascinating to watch. And it had to be an animal that could travel distances easily. And so, as it turns out, there are legend keepers in the story. There are mountain goat legend keepers and there are raven legend keepers. And they are the two that sort of stand out in the story. I agree. Rourke may be my favorite character too.
I have a soft spot for most corvids. I just have to protect some of them from my dog. She has declared war upon magpies. So we're going to get 3 books. We're going to introduce a male character. Because they are all being kind of impacted by climate and changes in climate. And you mentioned also that the activism of young people has been very inspiring to you. I'm curious if we'll get to see some of that activism play out in the books as well.
Yes, you will. And not only does climate change become, it's sort of a real subtext in the first book. It's not in your face. Certainly there's nothing preachy in this book. What you learn about it, you learn through the words and actions, the dialogue of the characters as part of their lives. In the second book, the same thing will happen, but in an expanded way through not only Buddy, but through the human characters as well, primarily Garson. And I guess I won't say any more about it than that.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Bruce. If you haven't grabbed Legend Keepers, The Chosen One, book 1 in the series, there is a link in the chat that you can do that. I'm going to just keep adding this in since I keep noticing some newcomers join us. And I think I'm going to welcome Laura next. Hi, Laura. Laura Ojeda Melchor is from Montana and grew up in a Spanish-speaking home that celebrated her family's Cuban culture. She is a self-described bookworm who graduated with an MFA in writing for children and young adults from Vermont College of Fine Arts. She now lives in Alaska with her husband and son. Laura will be sharing Missing Oakley with us. So Laura, take it away.
Thank you, Jessica. Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to be here. And like Jess said, my name is Laura Ojeda Melchor, and I live in Alaska now, but I grew up in Bozeman. And my debut novel, a middle grade novel, Missing Oakley, takes place there in a fictional town near Bozeman called Grayling Crossing, which is kind of like Gallatin Gateway, but not, like, embellished a bit. The story is about two sisters, Phoebe and Oakley Peterson, who are 12 and 10 years old. And like me, they are Cuban and speak some Spanish at home. Phoebe wants to be a singer, and she's got a chance to sing a solo for her big school concert and a chance to audition for America's Voice, a televised singing competition a la The Voice or American Idol. The day she learns about the singing competition, she and Oakley do their yearly secret tradition to celebrate springtime, which their parents don't know that they do. Every year, she and Oakley cross the Grayling River just outside their home, and they know they're not supposed to go in the river when the snowmelt has made it high, but that's what makes the challenge so fun for them. And every year they hold hands, and that helps them stay safe. Except this year, Oakley decides to cross on her own, even after she promises Phoebe that they'll hold hands. And unfortunately, she does not make it out of the river alive. And Phoebe is the only one who knows the truth about what happened, and she lies about what happened, and she's not about to readily tell anybody the truth. But the grief over losing Oakley causes Phoebe's singing voice to disappear, and she's not sure how to get it back. And she desperately wants to, because now the singing competition is about more than winning. It's also about singing for her sister one last time. So that's kind of the synopsis of the book. And like I said before, I grew up here in Montana, and there in Montana, and I loved living there so much. I spent a lot of time outside, outdoors, exploring, and after I left the state as a young adult, I realized that not everyone has the opportunity to live somewhere like Montana. So what I wanted to do in the book was bring readers there to Montana through Phoebe and Oakley's story. I spent my childhood doing so many things outside, including crossing the Bitterroot River up near Hamilton with friends whose grandparents had a house right on the river, and jumping off the Axtell Bridge up near Gallatin Gateway and into the Gallatin River in the summer. I did that a lot. And thankfully, everybody stayed safe during these river experiences, but I always wondered, what if they didn't? What if we underestimated nature, or something happened and something bad happened to somebody that I loved and cared about? And that's kind of how the story came about. I actually wrote the first draft in college as my senior thesis for my honors program. And my university was in the middle of the city in Southern California. My parents still lived in Bozeman, so I got to come back for Christmas and Thanksgiving and everything. And I missed Montana so much that it hurt. And it also, just that missing gave me a lot of clarity on how much beauty I'd been lucky enough to enjoy as a kid and as a teenager. So I thought that draft was like amazing, and it helped me get into Vermont College of Fine Arts, where I very confidently took the manuscript to my first workshop, and it got promptly and yet kindly torn apart. This began a string of revisions and rewrites after I got my literary agent a couple years later. And I'd say I've rewritten the book about 4 times and revised it several times after that. One of my favorite stories surrounding the book's publication is that I had originally woven a Joy Harjo poem into the novel, but we were having a hard time getting the rights to use the poem, which is super understandable because Joy Harjo is the poet laureate of the United States. So my editor had an idea to instead reach out to somebody that I knew to see if they could write a poem for the book. And I ended up getting in touch with Elaine Morrissette, an acquaintance from childhood and a Chippewa Cree activist who is doing amazing work at MSU and beyond. And she agreed to write a poem for the book, and I was so grateful. Possibly one of my favorite parts of the book is that the publisher put a line from her poem on the back cover right here. So I was super excited when I saw that. And that's about all I have. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Laura. My first question is going to put you on a spot a little bit.
Okay.
Are you a singer too? Are you more?
My sister is, though.
Aha,
And
okay.
I actually asked her, like, what does it feel like to be a good singer? Because I don't know.
Fantastic. I mean, obviously you're in Alaska now, which I feel like has a very similar kind of vibe in terms of that nature can take a turn. As before we started today, for those of you who have recently joined us, we were talking about bear encounters and all of those sorts of things. And I'm curious why you chose a non-animal encounter to be your dangerous environment versus, a bear or a snake or something like that.
That's a good question. And I will say I kind of left this out because I didn't know if I had time for it, but very quickly I did get the idea for this story, like kind of the seed of the idea when I was 12. And I lived in Montana, but I was visiting my aunt and uncle on the California coast. And I do have a sister who's 17 months younger. And we were at the beach and there was a sign that said, don't wade in this water, there's a riptide. And I was like, oh, what's a riptide? And kind of after investigating that, that's when I got the story, like what would happen if my sister went out into this riptide. And I originally was going to write the book from in the setting of that coastal area, but I was like a teenager-ish, 19-year-old in college, and I didn't have money to go live in, California for a while and research. And I really missed Montana. So I thought, why don't I put it in Montana and set it on a river, which is kind of that same fear, that same water as a dangerous theme. So
yes, I feel like this would pair excuse me, very well with another local author for adults. Jamie Harrison has a great new book that came out at the beginning of this year. Oh my gosh, called The Center of Everything. And in that, it's also a family story, and there is a loss on a river. So as you're grabbing Missing Oakley, add that one in too, and then there's reading for the whole family. Check, done. have you been able to keep in touch with the poet? Do you think that you'll have more of those poems in future books?
I would love to. Like I said, I'm so grateful. She's doing amazing things in Montana right now. So when I was growing up, she was a little younger than I was. And it was just so neat to kind of come full circle with that. And if I have the opportunity to include her in future books, I will. She actually kind of became a character in the book. It was neat.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
That's excellent. Well, I do have a note from Janet, so maybe we'll get to this a little later, but Janet also is a VCFA grad as well. So 2 Vermonters on screen tonight. I want to say thank you to Laura, and then I think I'm going to turn over to Effie and Celia.
Awesome. So here we are.
Here
Thanks.
we are.
You get a little spiel on us too, or?
I've got a little spiel on you
Okay.
too.
All right, here we go.
Effie, the dad, has been writing his whole life, inspired by his 6th grade teacher to write a story every week. He enrolled in the writing program during his undergrad and has been writing ever since. He loves the outdoors, music, and opportunities to tell stories, and he lives in beautiful Bozeman, Montana, where he works in software development and is active in various community groups. Celia, the daughter, is an avid book lover and packs a novel with her wherever she goes. Me too. She developed the book series idea at age 9, inspired by a 3rd grade writing assignment. She was born in Vancouver, Canada, where her first 2-syllable word was hockey. And she, along with her brother, are being raised in the mountains of Montana, where she enjoys art projects, performance art, and her dragon figurine collection. Effie and Celia, thank you so much for joining us to share the Elementalist series with us.
Yeah.
Book 1, Phoenix Rising.
Yeah. There it is. Phoenix
Yes.
Rising. And book 2.
Corridor the Ancient.
Corridor the Ancient.
With the dragon.
So we got
Dragons
the two going on. And obviously they're a fantasy series, and you can tell by the thickness, they're not a quick read. So I'll let Celia tell our story first, but just to explain how we do it, we're a father-daughter writing team. So these ideas a lot of them are coming out of Celia and her thoughts, and then I'll put them to the writing, and then we'll go back and forth. But I'll let Celia tell a little bit of the story of how these came about.
So after the I had the idea that I wanted to write a story about mythical creatures because they're cool, and I asked Dad about it, and he said, well, okay, because I knew he was into writing books and stuff like that. And so we started coming up with ideas. Who's the main character? What's the story? What kind of creatures do they face? And at first it was 2-3 books, I think, or maybe just 1 book. And
Yeah, I think it was a 3 or 4 books to start, and now it's grown. It's a 5-book series in the works. Anyway, we're working on book 3 right now. Sorry, keep going.
And I don't know.
Okay, that's all right. So what's fun about these books, and this is what I kind of the thing, that I think makes them really unique is it does have that dynamic of the youthfulness of somebody who's actually living in it and coming up with, Dad, this is the real kind of situation that someone would deal with here. Like, you got to rewrite this whole thing. And I'm like, okay. So, but I'm bringing in like the character development, the kind of the more mature ideas of trying to see, you know, good character arcs and growth, and kind of bring about like, you know, wholesome and to me as a dad, you know, kind of like wanting to see these characters maybe making some bad decisions, but then making some better ones as they go, and that kind of thing. So it's kind of got the breadth of all of that, you know, that kind of youthful spark as well as the maturity. So I think that's what makes them unique and fun. They are kind of like fast paced, a good read. We've heard book 2, 434 pages. We hear like a lot of people finish it in 1 or 2 days. So to give you a sense too, they've got like there's a lot of like art and illustrations on the insides. So there's like a map. There's another map.
Many maps.
There's a few maps. And then there's like here's an illustration on the inside. So there's a lot of different kinds of adventures, and the book 2 has 19 illustrations. So we just, you know, because we kept getting people saying it just felt so enchanting to have these, you know, you get this glimpse of this scene and you want to know more. And so we just kind of took up on that clue. I just got a piece of fan mail today that I just thought, oh, this describes, I really appreciated the way this person described what makes the book special. So I'm going to read you just a few words here. The second book was excellent, in some ways better than the first, which is quite an accomplishment. Things are maturing in character development, relationships, in the world that's surrounding the kids. The second volume continues to create new ideas at the same clip, which means that you must continue if you can. And why? Because you dive into the epic action drama genre that, let's face it, keeps our kids reading without the violence and arcane tedium. And I think the reason why is that the emphasis is on problem solving, self-discovery, discovering where one fits into the world. All successful books are about growth, not just the youth genre, which speaks to the growth mindset of the author. Even at my age, I find it inspiring and reminds me I have a lot to learn about life. So there you go. I just read that today, right before coming here. And I was like, oh, that's perfect. I'll like read that tonight. So anyway, I don't know if you have any other last thoughts.
I definitely think that the books that I have been devouring
It's a good term.
have impacted the book very heavily. Some of the main series that definitely played a part in the creation of our story were Rick Riordan, all of Rick Riordan's works, and Wings of Fire by, I literally cannot pronounce her name.
Oh, I think it's Tui. I don't know how to pronounce it. Tui Sutherland.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Wings of Fire, I think, were more influential because you see real character growth and you see
Dragons.
a lot of dragons and a lot of adventure that isn't necessarily like battle scenes. Because the Percy Jackson books are a lot more like every chapter is another battle, and ours don't really follow that pattern the same. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. So Celia, my first question is for you. Your dad was making it sound like he did a lot of the writing, but is he really just the punctuation and you're doing the writing?
It's funny because I don't like writing. I contributed. I came up with the ideas. Didn't really do any of the writing.
Fair.
So on our last copy, I would love to show this to you. We had the proof, and she was reading it one last time and editing, and she'd write in the margins, "Dad, she's not a robot. You know, you got to rewrite this whole scene. You know, you took there's no life in it. You know." I was like, "Oh, good point." You know, like so I'd read these.
Excellent feedback.
Yeah.
So I believe the first book, if not the first and second, were kickstarted. Is that correct?
Yeah.
What was the experience of kickstarting a book like?
Odd.
The first one was great. I think getting us to actually just get it started and get a video on took a lot of effort because we got refilming. But we hit our goal within, I think, the first day on the first book. There's just a lot of excitement around it. And the second one was more stressful because we didn't hit our goal until the very last day. So, but it was a good way to get started as new authors with no following, just to and it's also kind of odd because we ended up we were shipping books all around the world, which is kind of like, okay, here's somebody in Asia, here's someone 5 books in
Here's
Europe.
someone in Germany. I have no idea who this person is.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Mhm.
You've mentioned, obviously, there's a phoenix in Phoenix Rising. There are dragons in Crodor the Ancient. What are some other mythical creatures that we can anticipate seeing?
Mhm.
Well, more dragons.
More dragons.
Dragons.
Pixies
amazing.
are integral to the book.
Pixies.
Okay.
Smaller flying creatures like hippogriffs and griffins.
So we did create a few new creatures of our own.
Nice.
And then that picture I showed of those little raccoon ones, that's kind of like a Japanese idea, which there's this, what do they call it? I forget now.
I don't know.
But yeah, so so we kind of borrowed from different ideas out there and kind of also created some of our own.
Excellent. Who does your maps?
Oh man, we have this great illustrator. She's not local, but we found her online, and we have a great working relationship with her. So she did our inside illustrations and our maps, and our cover art was someone else. So
All the best books have maps. Well, thank you. I might welcome everyone back onto the screen. And if there are other questions that y'all want to ask each other or things like that, and then of course, any questions that our attendees might want to ask, again, you can just leave those in the chat or drop them in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. But if someone else wants to take it away, well, I push buttons. Well, fine. I can start because I feel like all of these books, in a way, are about family and community. And so I'm curious about the experience of writing with your family, since the way it works on my screen, Effie and Julia are almost right next to each other. And you both wrote with your kids. Laura was writing with your sister, or thinking of your sister anyway. And you have these great families, both found and biological. So I'm hoping I can get a couple of you to talk a little more about that. Don't be shy.
Yeah.
Well, I'll ask a question of Effie and Celia, because I have a son who is also a writer. He's a lot older than Celia, but how has the collaboration worked for you guys? Do you separate and then come back together? It sounds, Celia, like you are a storyteller, which that's how I would describe my son, and your dad is more of the organizer. And how do you guys feel about that? What's it like to work together like that?
Well, when if dad gets stuck on a scene, he'll come and ask me hey Celia, this is what happens in the scene. I'm wondering if you could come up with this part, or what are your thoughts? And then I also read through the entire thing, and then he's also reading it to me, so we can decide on it on what's happening together.
There is the back and forth, but I think a lot of times what happens is as I'm writing something, I'm like, wait a second, the characters wouldn't do this, like the characters have lives of their own, of course, and as you're getting to a stage, you're like, wait, this doesn't make sense the way we originally thought it through. And that's where I'll just pause and be like, Celia, we got to talk this scene out again. Like, this person, don't you think it like doesn't, I'll explain why it feels flat, why they wouldn't do this response. And she goes, oh yeah. And so then we'll I have this ideation session. We have them pretty often, a few times a week at least. Yeah, we're kind of overdue actually, because I've been traveling, so I just got back.
Did you find you had a similar experience, Julie?
Yeah, my kids were pretty vocal when they felt that I was off point. And I don't think they said it that gently. But a lot of the other stuff that they would contribute on, if I was like really dialed into where I was taking the story, they would tweak exactly what was going on with a particular character or contribute in a different way. Like my kids definitely contribute along the lines of the illustrations and whatnot. So it was touch and go. It depended on like, oh no, mom's heart's committed to that, or there were definitely those moments, and then other times where no, I think it would be better like this, and I'd be like, oh, I'm so glad, because that like resonated, and then of course like I'm not an artist. I'll just be straightforward about that. And both my kids are very much inclined that way. So yeah, and it was nice because the age difference, a 9-year-old is going to have such vastly different contributions than a 17-year-old. So that was kind of neat.
Very true. Laura, do you feel like your sister came back after the book came out and was like, that's not how singers do, or anything like that?
Thankfully, no. She's been very supportive. She's watching this right now. And and the book is dedicated to her. I just remember like when I first had that idea when I was 12 or whatever, I wrote it down on a piece of notebook paper and showed it to her. And I don't remember exactly what happened, but I feel like she was like, why am I the one who gets like swept out into the ocean? And I was like, I'm sorry. It's not really you. It's just a character. But I was always like really, mindful of her safety. Like when we would go skiing at Bridger Bowl with the school, I'd be thinking about like, okay, well, hopefully she doesn't like get hurt. And then she did get hurt. She broke her arm and things like that. But yeah.
Did your...
I just said all of you who are writing with your kids, it's very inspiring. I have a 5-year-old, so he's a little young for collaboration. But it's really inspiring to hear how, kids can help you write books. I love it.
Did your family appreciate the way that you portrayed Spanish-speaking homes and your Cuban heritage in the book?
I think so. My dad just finished reading it this morning. He's the one who's Cuban, and he said he loved it. So I was like, but nobody has said like otherwise. So I'm just gonna go with yes.
There's no grandparents or aunties that are like, you gave away my coquito recipe or something.
No. The only thing I wish is I had a note and a thank you to my Cuban grandmother, and she passed away before I could show her that. But I did get to show my grandfather, so that was nice. But yeah.
Wonderful. Bruce, what was the collaboration process like with your wife in terms of designing the illustrations and the cover art?
Oh, Jessica. As most of you know who are writers, generally the author doesn't get to pick an illustrator for their book. The publisher decides that. So I'll be pretty diplomatic here and just tell you that I was not enthralled with the illustrator that my publisher picked. That's
Okay.
no knock on them. It's somewhat of a crapshoot, but the illustrator was across the other side of the country. Of course, we're doing all of this electronically, remotely. And because I'm a scientist and I've worked with all of these animals, I know what they're supposed to look like. And the drafts of the illustrations that I had suggested for the book just weren't measuring up. And we struggled with this, the illustrator and I, for about 3 months. And finally, I talked to my publisher and I said, my editor, and I said, I don't think this is going to work. It's not the vision I have for how the book should be illustrated, including the cover. And he said, well, your wife did the map, because I knew it would be hard getting someone somewhere else to see the map that was in my head. So he had seen the map, which he loved. And so he said, well, maybe your wife could do it. And I couldn't believe he even said that. He said, would you have her send us 2 or 3 examples of what she might do? And so she did, and it was magic. That's the way it happened. And
Fantastic.
I'm so happy with the cover, and we've already gotten lots of positive feedback on the interior illustrations. So sometimes things just work out the way they're supposed to.
Exactly. I'm gonna put Janet and Bruce on the spot now. As you're both of your books are looking at kind of a call to action almost, or fostering activism in young readers. How much of that was intentional, and how much of that was sort of wanting to spur maybe parents of readers to make action, whether to combat homelessness or work on climate change?
Such an interesting question, because I never think about a book in terms of the didactic aspects. At least I try not to, because that's just not really fun to read. So, excuse me, for me, it's all about the character. And for me, this character was so resonant. She was so emotionally linked to the way I feel about connection, community, reaching out, being able or not to ask for help. And that's the message, that if there's a message, that's the only thing that I wanted to say in this book. It was all about her needing help and being in this situation and not being able to ask for help because she didn't know who to trust. She didn't know who to believe. And so that's the arc of the book, is for her to find that out, to find out there's this whole big community around her who have always been there, and that all she needed to do was find a way to ask for that help. So yeah, I think there's a call to action in there, in the sense that I really would love if people reading this, especially kids and teachers, would find ways to understand and communicate about the issues of homelessness and hunger, because I do think that we're on the cusp of a huge societal awakening with respect to that issue. With respect to that, I mean, the pandemic has really brought those issues out, and so I'd love to see that happen. But was that my intent? No. No.
And in my case, Legend Keepers is definitely a character-driven story. It's Buddy's story. In fact, the title had Buddy in the name, and then that got changed. A brain stormed my head while I was hiking in the Marine one day. But the character Buddy leaped from the pages. I mean, literally leaped from the pages of my book, Life on the Rocks, A Portrait of the Mountain Goat. There's a chapter in there specifically about the global change for alpine species, climate change, the climate crisis. And as I said, I wanted to find a way to reach children. Not that there aren't other children's books out there about this, but I wanted to write one about animals that live out of sight, out of mind, ones we don't know about, ones that are neglected by conservation. And most importantly, climate change, the warming of the temperatures are happening at least twice as fast at high altitudes and high latitudes as they are on a global average. So these animals have to adapt the fastest if they can. And in that sense, they're a canary in the coal mine. So I didn't want to write a book that, was like, this is what you have to do, or trying to be too heavy in conveying a message. I wanted the animals to do that. So as I mentioned before, what you learn about climate change is strictly the story of ravens and marmots and owls and mountain goats and so forth. And you'll see what these changes are like in their homes for them.
Wonderful.
The second book will have more of that from the human viewpoint.
Yes. So I just wanted to bring attention. Janet has also done a lot of really great corralling of information about homelessness and resources for folks that are on how to support the unhoused. So there is a link in the chat to her website if you want to make a care package and those sorts of things, and where to bring it for our Montana and Bozeman resources, especially since most of us are Bosemanites, which is fantastic. And I am also going to drop one more time the link to purchase all of our authors' books here into the chat. If you didn't grab any with your registration, just visit that link, add them all to your cart, because I know you want them all. And they all fit so nicely together. And I want to say a huge thank you to all of the authors that joined us this evening. Thank you so much for sharing your work and your time with us this evening. And we can't wait for all of those next books.
Thanks, Jessica.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you to Country Bookshelf.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, everyone. I hope you have a lovely night, and we'll see you next week. Night.